This is the second group Q&A question session of the January 18th, 2022 retreat. Are there any questions?
Yes, good morning. I have a question. Just formulating it. It's my knowledge, or say my reading of, I guess, Western psychology anyway, as it relates to, say, difficult emotions or unpleasant emotions. Say when anger comes up, there's a reflection or there's an inquiry. What expectation is not being met of mine, or what injustice is not being met, and then kind of examining that, or I'm feeling guilty. Well, is there a behavior that did not meet with the standard of mine? Is that accurate or not? Or I'm sadness. Where is the loss? With what I'm understanding of this emotion, more of, say, if you're sitting there and these distractions come up, or they're being more viewed as distractions or hindrances, there doesn't seem to be that that level of inquiry or examination is certainly promoted, at least in what I'm reading. Maybe you could comment on that a little bit, please.
Sure. Yes. One thing I could say is that the meditation is very much about just observing the object of meditation. It's not something where you analyze or contemplate, because that would just end up in thinking, not meditating. So that is one reason. A second reason is that this meditation, we are not interested in why these things come up, because sometimes, or quite often, you will not even know why it comes up. Because from the Buddha's perspective, we have had rebirth after rebirth after rebirth. A hindrance arises because at some point, whether 5 minutes ago or 10 years ago or in previous lifetimes, we broke a precept. And that creates karma, and that karma will come to fruition at some point, but you never know when. So things come up in the meditation, and it's just not useful to start analyzing why it comes up, or why it comes up now, or whatever, because the answer might just not be something that you will be able to figure out. Also, this meditation is very much about getting insight in how these mental processes work, and to see that they are all impermanent and impersonal and leading to suffering. And that is really way more important than to start figuring out emotions, whatever these emotions are, pleasant or unpleasant or whatever, because this will also develop a level of equanimity that will become stronger as the meditation progresses. Equanimity is really the stability of mind, where you are really increasingly more okay with whatever happens, good or bad. It's really like, yes, this is very pleasant, but it will not last, and I'm fine with that. Or this is very unpleasant, I have no control over it, but I know it will pass away at some point, and it's just okay. You are quite accepting of how life is, how it unfolds. So another answer to your question could also be that instead of delving deep into pains and questions about things that have happened or are about to happen or whatever, are really starting to become less important. I mean, if there are really traumas and very painful things, we might switch people over to forgiveness practice, because that is really something that will block the regular meditation. But generally speaking, you will notice that equanimity starts to develop, and these questions will become less important. It's like, yes, things happened, it's gone now. I'm just accepting of whatever comes up.
Thank you. I appreciate the insight.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have another question. So at times, I think especially in the later Arupa jhanas, I sometimes have the feeling that I fell out of one. And then the question, to me at least, obviously is, where am I at now? And how can I check where I'm at now to figure out what would be the appropriate measure or practice to follow? But on the other hand, I don't want to put too much energy into checking out where I'm at now. Where am I on the map? And yeah, this is something I've been pondering about in the last days.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, you know, a jhana is per definition a wholesome state of mind. So if you drop out of the jhana, it's because something unwholesome arises. So a hindrance in some form. I mean, if you get deeper into the meditation, it can be a very subtle hindrance, not really as coarse as in the beginning, but it will still be a hindrance that makes you drop out of jhana. And through the 6 R's, you get back into that jhana. But like you say, we are really not interested in where we are, in which jhana we are, because it's just not important, and it's also not the object of meditation. I've noticed that a lot of people who are really quite obsessed about the jhanas themselves and start to observe the jhana factors to figure out where they are exactly in that moment, it really usually blocks their process big time, because they are just not doing the meditation as we advise. They are observing the jhanas and not the Brahma Viharas. The Brahma Viharas are loving kindness, which in time progresses to compassion, to empathetic joy, and finally to equanimity. And that is, let's say, the anchor, the object of the meditation, while using the 6 R's as the key, which is crucial to any meditation, let's say.
So meaning, if I have the feeling that I dropped out, even if equanimity is, for example, my object of meditation, I would just go back to equanimity. I would not switch to Brahma Vihara because I feel that I've dropped a lot.
Yeah, well, you use the 6 R's, and the 6 R's bring you back to your object, whatever it is in that moment. It's either radiating loving kindness or compassion or joy or equanimity, or after that, observing the quiet mind, as we call it. So you drop out of a jhana, use 6 R, and you are back, returned to your object of meditation.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
I'd appreciate a brief overview of what these jhanas are. I've heard them discussed in some of the talks I was listening to the other day.
Yeah. Well, it starts with the first jhana, where there is still a lot of thinking and examining thought. And you will also notice a certain type of joy, and also something that is called sukha. It's really like a very pleasant, often quite bodily feeling, like sitting in a bath, let's say. And the mind gradually, if the conditions are right, gradually moves to the second jhana, where the really verbalizing thinking is starting to fade away or become more subtle. It changes more to imagery and things like that. And as you progress through the jhanas, there are all these factors like this joy or this sukha that will first become stronger and then gradually fade away. In the third jhana, you will notice that the feeling about the body is starting to change. For instance, you start losing the sensation of where is my arm, or I don't feel my leg, or things like that. In the fourth jhana, there is really a lot of mindfulness present and already quite a lot of equanimity. It's really a very stable base. And the fourth jhana basically divides into the arupa jhanas, where the mind is really into a mental realm and has left all attention to the body behind it. I mean, you might still notice the sensation of a fly landing on your skin or whatever, but all these bodily sensations that you have initially are really not important for the mind anymore. And then the arupa jhanas, there are 4 of them. In the first jhana, a lot of people experience a kind of spaciousness, like the mind is expanding and there is no real boundary anymore. And that will give way to the next jhana of infinite consciousness. And you will notice consciousnesses arise and pass away at great speed. It depends on which sense door is quite important for you. I mean, a painter would probably have visual consciousnesses that they see arise and pass away. A musician might notice ear consciousnesses arise and pass away. I will not go into detail in how you see them or how you observe them. I prefer people telling the guide how they perceive it. Then the next jhana will be that sensation that there is really nothing there. It's really like a realization, hey, there is nothing. And finally, the final jhana will be where perception is becoming so subtle that it's not quite there, but it's also not quite absent. And perception is really the labeling aspect of things. I mean, if I show you this, the perception aspect of your mind will recognize it as a pen, because you have learned this is a pen, this is what a pen looks like. And that starts to become very iffy in the final jhana, where the mind is really not able. There will be things arising and passing away, but it's really not possible to label them as, oh, that is this or that or whatever. But the Brahma Viharas are not the jhanas. The Brahma Viharas are like a layer on top of the jhanas. So while we are observing loving kindness or compassion or joy or equanimity, the jhana, we move through the jhanas, but we are not observing the jhanas. We are observing that layer on top, the loving kindness and things like that. So this is a very, very coarse outline about how the meditation starts to deepen. And over time, as people tell us what happens in their meditation, what things arise, or what bodily sensations are there, or whatever, we will change the instructions accordingly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's interesting. It seems to be part of this process is almost this unlearning or this unconditioning of this unconditioning, and I just saw with the jhana that there was almost this subtlety, or as I saw folks talk of the jhana or elaborate on the jhana, there's a subtlety that it could become a craving. Like I could see how it could turn into this is my goal, or this is my, and I'm referencing back to this, and where am I on this scale? And I just saw that I think it's important that I guess it maybe it unfolds, but to be very just that unfolds, and that can be observed, but not to become so core to the to the process or to the meditation.
Yeah, that's really an excellent comment, because, you know, some people in some traditions make a big deal out of jhanas, but we see them more as levels of understanding, because as each jhana changes, you will start to notice different things about what is happening in the mind. And it's really important that over time you will get these insights into how the mind is working. And jhanas are really not something to pride yourself in. I mean, there are people who are saying, oh, I'm in this jhana or in that jhana, but that is really not the point. I mean, that is just conceit about, look at how good I am at this practice or whatever. Also, a lot of different practices have also different kinds of jhanas, where they are so focused on the jhana in and of itself that they are in a state of bliss without even noticing any hindrances or outside sounds or whatever comes up. They are just focused on the jhana itself, which can be very strong and very blissful, and thus also very easy to get attached to. But the jhanas, as we practice them, as the Buddha advised, are very open, because you don't push the hindrances or distractions out of the way. You accept that they are there, you see them, and you gently let them go through the 6 R's and go back to the observing. But what you are saying is really an excellent point, that you really observe. You don't merge into loving kindness. You don't become loving kindness. It's just an anchor that we are using because it has a lot of benefits. For instance, it's the antidote to aversion. So you will notice that irritation and anger and things like that start to become less frequent and less intense, and in the end will even disappear completely. So it's just that we use these Brahma Viharas as an object, as an anchor for the mind to have something to observe, while letting go of the hindrances that are arising. Because if you don't have any object, it will be very easy to just be in this very unclear state of not having anything to hold on to. So the Brahma Viharas are a very useful and very wholesome way of anchoring the mind while seeing and letting go of distractions. I mean, also, you know, these Brahma Viharas are also conditioned states. The Buddha was very clear that whatever conditioned state, even if it's good and wholesome, is still not the goal of the practice. The goal is the unconditioned state of nibbana.
Thank you. I appreciate your insights. Thank you.
It was a really good discussion so far. So I'm just wondering, how can you lose such a level of understanding, or the attainment of a specific jhana as of level of understanding?
Lose it?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, if it is a level of understanding, I wonder if that level of understanding is persistent in a way.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, well, there are basically two kinds of things. There is intellectual knowledge, where, for instance, someone explains things and you feel like, yeah, I'm getting to understand what he or she is talking about. That is really intellectual understanding. But what happens in the meditation is that it's wisdom. It's really seeing for yourself how things are. So, for instance, if you have this view that the earth is flat, I can tell you it's round, and you feel like, well, she or he is very convincing, and I believe now that the earth is round. That is an intellectual knowledge. But when you get invited to get into a rocket and just see the earth for yourself, that is wisdom, because you have seen the earth as a round object, and the whole world can be telling you that the earth is flat, but you will just know that it doesn't make sense because you have seen for yourself that this is not so. And in the meditation as well, as you start to progress and get these insights, you will really know and see for yourself that things are happening by themselves, and things are impermanent, always arising and passing away, and usually at great speed. So you will start to learn for yourself that things are impermanent and impersonal, and that they lead to suffering depending on where you are in your practice. So in that case, it's really turning into wisdom. So you will not really lose that. I mean, you might forget about it in daily life and get sucked into that sense of this is myself and this is mine and whatever. It takes time to develop that wisdom all throughout your entire life, let's say. But I would say that if you start seeing things in meditation, it's really not something that you will lose. It starts to become a part of your knowing and seeing and your understanding in that way.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense.
So someone else couldn't make it today, but she also had a question. She wanted to know a bit more about dependent origination. So I will explain a little bit about that, but not the entire dependent origination, because I want to keep it quite basic this time. Dependent origination is in its core is understanding that there are causes and conditions for everything that is happening. For instance, if you have a cold, one of the causes is that you would need a body, because if you don't have a body, you can't have a physical cold. And also, if you have a cold, you would have been in contact with those viruses that cause the cold. So the Buddha explained that things don't happen at random. They happen because there are causes and conditions for them to arise. He said, when this happens, that happens. When this does not happen, that does not happen. So you can't have a cold if you don't have a body. So that is really dependent origination at its core, that things arise, but never at random. They arise because there are causes that make them arise. That can be on a physical level, but it's also happening at a mental level. And dependent origination is a series of 12 links where you can start partly in daily life, but also in also in meditation, you can start to recognize them for yourself. To keep it simple, I will highlight a couple of links that are also, with a bit of practice, easy to recognize in daily life. However, be aware that if I speak about one chain of dependent origination, there are probably millions of dependent origination links arising and passing away in a split second. So it's very, very fast. So the first link that I want to highlight is that there are the 5 physical senses, and the 6th sense is the mind, and the mind object of thinking and emotions or whatever arises. So there is a sense contact that gets activated. So for instance, there is something that hits the eye. You see it as color and form. For instance, you are seeing me. Basically, there are all these protons hitting the eye. So you have these protons, you have a physical eye that is needed, but there is also eye consciousness that will arise. And when these 3 things come together, there is an eye contact that arises. The Buddha said it's always in this order, that first that sense contact arises, and immediately after that a feeling will arise. Let's say an eye feeling, a feeling of the experience, and coupled to that will be that it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So you see something that you like, that you find pleasant, and instantly after that feeling of pleasantness, there will arise craving, because you start to take it personal. You say to yourself, basically, not even consciously, I like it. But it's just a feeling that arose because there is this sense contact that arises. It's not you, it's not personal. You didn't make that that visual object arise. You didn't choose to look at it, it just arose. There will always arise a feeling of pleasant or unpleasant or a neutral feeling. And then after there arises craving, taking it personal. I like it, I don't like it, or I am experiencing this. Then the next link will be the clinging. Clinging is really the story of why you like it. I mean, if a person hates dogs and they see a dog, an unpleasant feeling will arise. They will feel like, I don't like that. And the story might be, as a child, I was bitten by a dog and I really hate dogs. That is the clinging aspect. Or if you like dogs, there arises a pleasant feeling. You take it personal, I like it. I like seeing that dog, and I like seeing dogs because I always had dogs and I love them and they are fun to be around with, and whatever. That is the story about it. Next comes the link of becoming. It's also called being. Bhante Vimalaramsi calls it habitual tendencies. It's basically that clinging, that story starts to solidify into your personality. It's like that link is your personal library, where it solidifies in whatever you like or dislike. It's really explaining why one person loves to watch airplanes and another person is obsessed about animals, like this creature there, or loves cars or likes to be around people or whatever. That is really their basic personality library. And it's also where the responses and reactions are stored. For instance, if someone gets angry at a person, one person might start to shout. It's really how their personal library is. If someone gets angry at me, I will shout. But another person might always burst into tears. And another person might start to walk away from the situation. So everyone has these own responses to situations that are really like this solidification, and it's like a reflex that if this happens, I will respond in that way usually. Now, the next link after that is that that response comes out in a way. It might be a physical action. For instance, you like to pet the dog, or it might be that it's only a thought that arises, or it's really that you speak, that you burst out into speak as a response. But because it all arises from taking things personally, it will always lead to suffering and creation of new karma that will come to fruition at some point in the future. Because it's that taking personally is really the wrong view that the mind has. The mind never questions that idea of self. It always perceives whatever sense contact arises as being personal in some way. It might be in the sense of that you feel that I am experiencing this, I am this being, this entity. It might also be that I lost my train of thought. But it's it's really that the mind does not understand that all these things arise from previous causes and conditions. It's like watching a movie. A movie is basically a lot of frames that are played through a machine at great speed, and you get this sense that everything is a flow, that the movie is a flow. And we are basically just like that. We experience everything as a flow of like a permanent entity, a permanent consciousness that is experiencing all this. So it makes sense that the mind is mistaken, because it just happens too fast to be able to see that things are arising and passing away at great speed. I mean, you can't see the individual protons hitting the eye. You just see color and form. And that is the case with all consciousnesses, from the ear or taste or smell or physical sensations, or the mind particularly. It goes so fast that you can't make the distinction that it's all arising and passing away very quickly. And thus the mind feels like I am, or this is mine, or this is myself, this is a part of myself. So what we are doing in this meditation is that we start to take on faith that the 6 R's might be helpful for our view of life. And what the 6 R's are doing is, when a hindrance arises, that means there is craving arising, or even clinging. It might already be the story that you are in. And the 6 R's are basically interrupting that chain of dependent origination. Why? Because if you interrupt at craving or clinging, like I said in the beginning, when this happens, that happens. When this doesn't happen, that doesn't happen. So if you interrupt through the 6 R's at craving or clinging, suffering will not be able to arise. I mean, not all suffering, but the suffering that would be developed in that moment. Instead, we say to ourselves, basically through this meditation, yeah, I'm not going to go there. That is really an unwholesome, unpleasant state of mind. I prefer to bring the mind back to something wholesome, which is, for instance, loving kindness, or compassion, or joy, or equanimity, or in daily life, for instance, generosity, choosing to help the neighbor out by walking their dog, or choosing to smile at strangers, making a little happy moment in their lives, for instance. So this is why the 6 R's are over time changing our personality, because we keep interrupting that chain of dependent origination, where all those reactions can't solidify into that link of becoming, of habitual tendencies, and can't develop into suffering. I mean, if you would suppress a hindrance within the meditation, or ignore it, or just don't recognize it, it will make you pay attention to it, and you will be fueling it, and thus it will arise more often, because everything you pay attention to, that will start to incline the mind a certain way. So if you pay attention to traumas, you might be stuck for many years into that traumatic experience that you had, and you just don't know of a way out of it. But if it comes up in the meditation and you see, yes, this is unpleasant, but I see it, I recognize it, I just prefer to let it go, then slowly over time, it will start to become less intense, and it will start to weaken. And because you choose to pay attention to loving kindness, for instance, you start to strengthen loving kindness, because that will become the inclination of the mind. So this is really why dependent origination is so important to learn, to understand, and to see within the meditation, because it is just this tremendous tool that the Buddha discovered, where he said, this is how the mind works. And if you know how it works, you suddenly have a choice, because you can choose to let it all happen, creating more and more suffering for yourself, creating unpleasant karma that will come to fruition. Or another unpleasant way is that people that don't meditate only know one way out of suffering, which is chasing sense pleasures. One person might be glued to the TV or a hobby or alcohol or going out with friends or whatever, because they just don't know of another way out of that suffering that arises in their lives. But the Buddha told us, hey, this is what is happening, and now you have a choice, because if you let go of it, you will not be able to create new karma, because you will just gently return to a wholesome state of mind, weakening the suffering over time and strengthening loving kindness and generosity and smiling and being nice to people. It's not that you force yourself to be kind, it's just that the unpleasant suffering can't arise anymore because you keep letting go over and over again, and strengthening the wholesome states of mind, and thus giving more space to better responses for whatever happens in your life, and also experiencing joy and happiness without any apparent outside reason, because you have been reinforcing it so much that it will arise more and more over time. So this is just a part of dependent origination that I wanted to get into today. It's way more complicated than that, but this is really the part from the sense contact onwards that you can start to recognize in daily life, that you notice, oh, there is this sense contact that arises. Immediately after that is that feeling and perception of, oh, this is experienced as pleasant or unpleasant, or experienced as taking it personal. Next, there is the craving of, I like it, or I don't like it, or I am experiencing this, or this is mine, or this is myself. Next, it will naturally go into the story about why you like or dislike certain things. Next, it will start to solidify into your personal library of reactions and responses to whatever happens in your life. And that will, in the next link, break out in some way, for instance, in an bodily action or in something you say, and that will lead to suffering. Might not be instant, might also be in the next moment. For instance, if you don't 6-hour hindrance, but instead get swept away by, oh, I have this memory and it's very unpleasant, and that person got sick and it was such a terrible time, etc., etc. It will start to move into suffering because you are feeding that memory, and it will return more often and more intense. And when you start to recognize dependent origination, you have a choice to sever the links, for instance, after craving or after clinging, thus not leading to suffering, because you start reinforcing wholesome states of mind.
Thank you for that explanation. A question on that. When you talked about, you have the contact with some form of sense, and then it's generating this feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Is that not a craving assigning that designation to or some kind of designation to the sensory experience?
Yeah. Well, it's quite complicated, because I would say that even from the start of dependent origination, there is already that sense of self present. But in the sense that, for instance, if you are an architect and you like buildings, even when the sense contact still has to arise, you already have that inclination of looking for buildings, let's say. Even before you see a certain building, that is already where the mind will instantly go, watching buildings. So in a sense, that entire chain is already tainted with a sense of self. But generally speaking, that feeling just arises, and it's just an automatic thing that happens with every sense contact that arises. And the craving is really where it becomes more conscious that you are taking it personal. It's really a very, I mean, before that, it's already tainted, but it's really below the consciousness. You are really not aware of that happening. But in the craving aspect, it's really becoming conscious that I like this or I hate this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And as it seems to me, like within that chain, although the causes and conditions aren't necessarily random if you're looking at a specific snapshot of time, say, but your personal library would seem to me would be almost random, in that it's like it's kind of the randomness of where your life was geographically, where you were born to, etc. All of the experiences that happen to you that are forming this library are essentially random, which to me would help to depersonalize it to a degree, whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're born, whether you're you know, all of your interactions that you then file in here, that this is these are my occurrences, say.
Yeah.
Seems to me that would be random.
Yeah, but it's not.
It's not random.
It's not random.
Hmm.
I mean, if you look at rebirths, I mean, you may or may not believe in rebirths, but then these processes continue over lifetimes. So even a baby, I mean, you probably would agree that if you have two babies, they will be different from birth on. One baby would be crying all day long, and another baby is very happy and easygoing and is happy to play or watch certain things for long amounts of time. So these habitual tendencies are already in a newborn, and it's really where the attention has been going over. Even if you don't believe in lifetimes, the attention still has been going from birth on, or before birth even, into inclinations of what is pleasant and what is unpleasant. You could also see from a different perspective that if you understand karma, this entire body is old karma. It's a result of previous actions and conditions. If you look at where you are born, the Buddha clearly states in certain suttas that it's not random what is happening. I mean, if people have been very generous in previous lifetimes, they might end up as a human being who has a really wealthy life as a result of actions that were performed previously. And you never know you can't analyze where all this stuff and interesting things are coming from. But if someone is near a pool, they might experience some fear, and they might not know why, but it makes them uncomfortable to be near water. That may very well be that in some lifetime or another, they drowned in a mass of water, for instance. And might also be pleasant karma that's coming to fruition, where you don't know why, but you just love this or that. And your parents will tell you, yeah, even when you were small, you were always playing with these little trains or whatever. And who knows where it's coming from, might be from this lifetime, might be from past lifetimes, but it's not random. It's all caused by where the attention is going. I mean, let's say I will talk to you about some animal that doesn't exist. So you don't have any preconceived notions about that animal because it doesn't exist. But when I'm starting to talk about that animal and I'm calling it a flexor, and I'm telling you that it has purple fur and it's really soft, and they have these huge big eyes, and they like to sit on your shoulder, and they are very affectionate. If I would be talking to you all day about that non-existing animal, you will be paying attention to that, and you will start to have certain feelings around it. If you hate animals, you might be disgusted, even if that animal doesn't exist. But if you like animals, you are really like, oh, I wish that animal would exist, and maybe I can make a toy that at least feels and looks a bit like it, and things like that. So the attention is going there. And if you have a big interest in it because it's so unpleasant or so pleasant, it will get solidified. It might even bring up certain ideas for, if you are a painter, it might bring up ideas to start painting fantasy animals or whatever. If I hadn't been telling you about it, you might never have come across that idea, but it's starting to develop because the attention was going there. And yeah, so it's never random. It gets formed over time because we are not objective. We always like certain things. We always dislike certain things. And if you pay a lot of attention to that, it gets solidified. Maybe solidified over one lifetime, but if you understand and believe in rebirths, it gets solidified over endless amounts of rebirth. So it's not random.
Interesting. Thank you.
It happens because of the attention that is going there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One other question just on that topic, and if I'm following the lineage here, so I see the dog. I have this again. Hey, I like dogs. I grew up with dogs. I pet dogs. I was playful with dogs. Hey, I'm going to pet this dog and have this interaction. But you're saying because that followed through this notion of craving, this notion of clinging and application of my personal stories, even that outcome of I pet the dog, I rolled around with the dog and had some threw the ball with the dog, that leads to a suffering?
Yes.
Okay.
Suppose you have a dog. The dog will die, for instance. Or the dog gets very sick and it takes a huge amount of bills to pay to cure them or to prolong their life in some way. or it might be a little bit of suffering. For instance, you want to pet the dog and the dog is like, no, I'm walking away. That's not really pleasant. You don't like that because you want to cuddle or play with the dog, and the dog says, well, no, not now. So there are all these kinds of suffering that are there. I mean, in every relationship, you will have a lot of suffering, but most people will either ignore it or not recognize it. I mean, if you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, for instance, you might experience first the insecurity of, do they like me back? That is a lot of stress, because it might take a long time that you have this, keep thinking about, do they like me, don't they like me, how to approach them, what to do. Or if they start looking at someone else, there is jealousy arising. Or even when you decide to come together and to live together, there are all these little sufferings because everyone has their own way of doing things. And it might be that that person does things differently than you do. And there are these little irritations. There is also suffering because if they don't feel good, you don't feel good. Or if they get sick, you have all these worries and stress about them. And in the end, they might die before you die. So there is a tremendous amount of suffering, even if it's very subtle, but there is a lot of suffering because you take things personally. Let's say you have a daughter. If your daughter dies, you will be, and you take her personally, you have a history with her, you loved her dearly, you will be drowning in grief, usually. But suppose there is a girl the same age on the other side of the planet, and they die. It's just a statistic. You won't be affected as much. Why? Because you didn't know her. You just see an article, or maybe as a number, this amount of people died in Africa because of hunger, let's say. And what is the difference? The difference is that you take your child very personally. It's your child. People are talking about, she is my blood. Some parents are even quite obsessed that their children should behave and act in certain ways because it's their child, and they feel like they should mold it into a child that is like this. So it's really that once you take things personally, there will arise craving and clinging and a personal library because of the attention you are spending to someone. If you have a neighbor you have known for 30 years and you regularly speak to them, you will be very upset if there is something happening in their lives which is unpleasant, they get sick or whatever. But if you have another neighbor whom you never even talk to and they get sick, yeah, it's unfortunate for them. You might feel something, but it's really not that big of a deal. Why? Because it's really less personal. There's less attention that is going there. And finally, I would say it's not necessarily so that the suffering arises instantly. It might also arise a long while later. We don't have any control over when that will be.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So any final questions, or is that enough info? Okay, let's share some merit then. Yeah. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, everyone. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.